He wasn't meant to make it back. Not from war, not from the silence that followed, and certainly not from the quiet place he now called home, where nothing was supposed to hurt anymore. Yet on a cold October night in a small Montana town, where the wind slipped through the cracks of old wooden walls and carried the scent of pine and distant rain, Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole lay on the living room floor with one hand curled loosely against his chest and the other stretched toward a glass of water he never managed to reach, his breathing shallow, uneven, like a rhythm forgetting itself, and beside him, standing perfectly still as if carved from shadow and instinct, was Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat darkened along his spine and eyes that had once scanned deserts for threats, but now burned with something deeper, something heavier, something that did not belong in a peaceful home. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until it feels loud, broken only by the faint ticking of a wall clock and the soft rustle of wind against the window panes. And yet Rex did not move, not at first, because he had learned something in war that never leaves you, not even when the uniform is folded away, that sometimes the danger is not loud, not visible, not something you can chase or fight. Sometimes it is the stillness itself, the absence of sound where life should be. And he watched Ethan the way he had watched him once before in a place far from here, a place of dust and heat and distant echoes, where the sky had been too wide and the ground had never felt safe. And for a brief second, just a flicker, the memory crossed between them like a ghost neither could shake. The day Rex had pulled Ethan from a field that should have taken him, the first time he had refused to let his Marine disappear, and now here they were again, not surrounded by chaos, but by something far more deceptive, something that wore the mask of peace. Outside, a single porch light flickered, casting long, uneven shadows across the yard, and inside, Rex's ears twitched at a sound too small for most to notice, a break in breathing, a pause too long, and suddenly the stillness wasn't just quiet anymore. It was wrong, deeply wrong, and Rex stepped forward, slow at first, placing each paw with deliberate care as if the floor itself might betray him, his nose brushing Ethan's hand, cold, unmoving, and something inside the dog shifted, not panic, not fear, but purpose. The same quiet force that had guided him through gunfire and confusion now rising again in a place that should have never needed it, his body tensing, his chest expanding with a breath that carried both memory and instinct. Because this was not the battlefield, but the stakes felt the same, and somewhere in that fragile space between life and loss, Rex understood what no one else could see, that the war had followed them home in a different form, silent, patient, waiting for a moment like this. Ethan's eyes fluttered, just barely, not enough to wake, not enough to call for help, just enough to remind the world he was still there, and Rex leaned closer, his amber gaze locked onto the man who had once trusted him with everything. And in that moment there was no command, no training drill, no shouted order, just a bond forged in something deeper than language, something that did not ask permission before acting. And as the wind pressed harder against the house and the clock continued its steady, indifferent ticking, Rex made a decision, the kind that cannot be taught, only carried, the kind that says this is not where the story ends, not tonight, not like this. And somewhere beyond the walls of that quiet home, help existed, unaware, unreachable unless someone went to find it, unless something refused to let silence win, and Rex, without hesitation, turned toward the door, the first step already taken before the thought could even form. Because sometimes survival does not come from strength or luck or even time. Sometimes it comes from a soul that simply refuses to let go. And as he moved, the house seemed to hold its breath, as if even the walls knew that what happened next would decide everything, not just for the man on the floor, but for the promise that had been made long ago without words, a promise that once saved a life on a battlefield and now demanded to be kept again in the quietest war of all. Before we begin, tell me, where are witching from? Drop your country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The door did not open easily, not because it was locked, but because time itself seemed to resist what was about to happen. The old hinges groaning under the weight of a night that felt heavier than it should, and Rex pushed through with his shoulder, the wood scraping softly against the floor as a rush of cold air slipped inside. carrying with it the sharp scent of rain and distant earth, a smell that reminded him of another place, another night, when survival depended on movement and instinct alone, and for a fraction of a second, he hesitated on the threshold, turning his head back toward Ethan, who lay unmoving in the dim glow of a single lamp, the light casting long shadows across the floor as if trying to reach him, hold him, keep him anchored to something, anything, and Rex let out a low sound, not quite a bark, not quite a whine, something deeper, something that carried memory, because he had seen this before, not in this room, not in this town, but in a moment where the world had narrowed to one choice, stay or act, and staying had never been an option, not then, not now. The porch creaked under his weight as he stepped out into the night, the air colder than it had been earlier, the temperature dropping fast as clouds gathered above, thick and heavy, swallowing the stars one by one. And somewhere in the distance thunder rolled low, not loud enough to startle, just enough to remind the world that something was shifting, and Rex moved down the steps quickly, his paws hitting the gravel with soft, urgent rhythm, his body low, focused, every muscle aligned toward a single purpose, because somewhere beyond the dark line of trees, beyond the quiet stretch of road that rarely saw traffic this late, there were people, there was help. But distance was a barrier, and time was something he could not measure the way humans did. He only felt it, slipping, thinning, becoming fragile. He reached the edge of the yard and stopped for a brief second, his head lifting, ears forward, listening, not just for sound but for absence, for anything that did not belong. And when nothing answered, he moved again, faster now, crossing the dirt path that led toward the nearest house nearly a quarter-mile away, a place with a porch light that stayed on through the night, and a man who sometimes spoke to him over the fence, his voice calm, steady, familiar, and Rex held on to that memory like a direction, like a map drawn not with lines but with trust. The wind picked up as he ran, brushing through his coat, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant wood smoke, and each step seemed to echo louder than it should in the quiet, his breath steady, controlled, the same rhythm that had carried him across harsher ground. But this was different, because there were no commands guiding him, no handler beside him, only the weight of a life behind him and the silent understanding that no one else knew what was happening inside that house. Not yet. The neighbor's home came into view slowly, its outline faint against the dark sky, a single warm light glowing from the window, and Rex pushed forward, closing the distance with urgency now, his paws slipping slightly on damp grass as the first drops of rain began to fall, soft at first, almost gentle, but steady, building, and when he reached the porch, he did not hesitate. He jumped up, his claws tapping against the wooden boards as he turned toward the door and barked, sharp, clear, once, then again, louder, each sound cutting through the quiet night like a signal that refused to be ignored. And inside, movement shifted, a shadow passing behind the curtain, slow at first, uncertain, and Rex barked again, pacing now, his body tense, eyes locked on the door as if willing it to open, because every second mattered, even if he could not count them, even if he did not understand time the way humans did. He understood loss, and he refused to feel it again. The door opened a crack, just enough for a voice to come through, groggy, confused, asking a question Rex could not answer with words, and for a moment, the man inside simply stared, seeing only a dog in the rain, alone, restless. But then something changed, something in the way Rex held his ground, in the urgency of his movement, in the sound of his bark that was not random but deliberate, calling, insisting, and the man stepped out, the door opening wider now, the light spilling onto the porch and catching the rain as it fell, turning each drop into something visible, something real, and Rex backed away, then turned, looking over his shoulder, then back again, a silent invitation, a command without authority but filled with purpose, and the man hesitated for only a second, before grabbing his jacket, stepping into the night, and following, because sometimes the truth does not arrive in words, sometimes it arrives on four legs, soaked in rain, carrying a message that cannot be ignored. And as they moved back toward the house where Ethan lay, the storm began to settle in around them, not violent, not overwhelming, just steady, like a clock that refused to stop, marking every moment that still remained. The distance back felt longer than before, not because the path had changed, but because something unseen had tightened around every second, pulling them forward with quiet urgency as the rain settled into a steady rhythm, tapping against the ground, the trees, the roof lines in the distance. And Rex did not slow, not once, his pace unwavering as he led the man through the dim stretch of land that separated safety from uncertainty, his body cutting through the darkness with a kind of certainty that did not need explanation. And behind him the man followed, breath growing heavier, boots sinking slightly into damp earth, his flashlight beam shaking with each step, catching glimpses of wet grass, fence posts, the outline of Rex's moving form just ahead, and something about the way the dog moved, not frantic, not lost, but deliberate, made the man's chest tighten with a realization he could not yet fully name. The house came into view again, its porch light flickering faintly against the rain, the door still open just enough to reveal the dim glow inside. And Rex reached it first, bounding up the steps and slipping through the gap without hesitation, disappearing into the shadows as if he had never left, and the man followed seconds later, stepping inside with a cautious urgency, his eyes adjusting to the low light. The smell of the house different now, heavier, like the air itself had shifted, and then he saw him, Ethan Cole, lying exactly where Rex had left him, unmoving, the glass still tipped on its side just out of reach, the quiet inside the room deeper than anything outside. And for a moment the man froze, the weight of what he was seeing settling in slowly. Because this was no longer a question of why the dog had come, it was a question of how much time was left. Rex was already at Ethan's side, his body close, almost touching, his head lowered near Ethan's chest as if listening for something only he could hear, and the man moved quickly now, kneeling beside them, his hands uncertain at first, then steadier as instinct took over, reaching for his phone, dialing for help, his voice low but urgent as he gave the address, describing what he saw, each word grounding him in action while the room itself seemed to hold its breath. And Rex did not move, not even when the man spoke, not even when the distant sound of a dispatcher's voice filled the space. He stayed locked in place, his eyes never leaving Ethan, his focus absolute, as if his presence alone could hold something together that was trying to slip away. Outside, the rain continued, soft but relentless, tapping against the windows in a rhythm that felt almost like a countdown. And inside, time stretched, each second longer than it should be, the kind of waiting that presses against the chest, that makes the air feel thinner. And the man reached out, placing a hand gently near Ethan's shoulder, calling his name. Once, then again, louder, but the response was faint, barely there, a flicker more than a movement. And Rex reacted instantly, his ears lifting, his body shifting closer, a low sound escaping him. Not loud, not panicked, but filled with something raw, something that echoed a memory neither of them could see, but both could feel. The man glanced at the dog then, really seeing him for the first time, not just as a pet, not just as a companion, but as something else, something that had recognized this moment long before anyone else, something that had refused to stay still when stillness would have been easier. And that realization settled heavily, because without that choice, without that silent decision to act, this room would have remained quiet, unnoticed, until it was too late. In the distance, faint at first, then growing clearer, came the sound of sirens, not urgent, not blaring, but steady, approaching, a sound that cut through the night and into the house like a promise finally arriving. And the man exhaled slowly, a breath he had not realized he was holding, while Rex remained where he was, unmoving, his presence anchored beside Ethan as if he had already decided that leaving was no longer an option, not now, not after everything. And as the lights from outside began to flicker through the windows, casting brief flashes across the walls, the room shifted again, not fully safe, not yet certain, but no longer alone. And in that fragile space between what was and what could still be, one truth settled quietly, undeniable, that whatever had followed them home had not come unnoticed, because something had been watching, waiting, and when the moment came, it chose to act, not once, but again. The sirens did not rush in like chaos. They arrived steady, controlled, like something trained to meet the edge of uncertainty without breaking it. And as the red and white lights washed softly across the walls of the small house, painting everything in brief pulses of color, Rex did not flinch, not when the front door opened wider, not when unfamiliar footsteps crossed the threshold, not even when new voices filled the air, calm but urgent, carrying words he did not understand but recognized. In tone alone, because he had heard that tone before, not here, not in this quiet town, but in places where lives balanced on moments just like this one. The paramedics moved with practiced rhythm, kneeling beside Ethan, their hands steady, their movements efficient yet careful, one checking his breathing, another preparing equipment, their focus narrowing the room into a single point of action, and the neighbor stepped back instinctively, giving space, his earlier uncertainty replaced now with a quiet stillness. Watching as the professionals took over, but Rex did not move, not even when one of them gently reached toward him, not to push him away but to guide him aside. And for a brief second there was tension, not aggressive, not resistant, just a silent question held in the dog's posture. A question that asked whether leaving now would mean losing something again. And then, slowly, as if understanding passed without words, Rex stepped back just enough, his eyes never leaving Ethan, his body angled toward him like a line that could not be broken. The air inside shifted again, no longer heavy with stillness but filled with motion, quiet commands exchanged, equipment adjusted, time no longer stretching but compressing, moving forward with purpose, and outside the rain softened slightly, the steady rhythm easing as if the night itself was listening, waiting, and in that fragile space between action and outcome, Rex stood still, his chest rising and falling in controlled breaths, his ears flicking at every sound, every shift, every change, because this was not the battlefield, but the feeling was the same, the thin edge where something could be lost or held, where decisions carried weight beyond themselves. One of the paramedics spoke softly to Ethan, calling his name, grounding him, guiding him back toward something. And there was a response, faint but real, a small movement, a breath that carried more intention than before. And Rex saw it instantly, his body leaning forward, just slightly, not stepping in, not interfering, but acknowledging it, as if that single sign meant more than everything that had come before, because he understood what it meant when something returned, even in the smallest way. The stretcher was brought in, its wheels quiet against the floor, and as they prepared to move Ethan, to carry him from this place into another where help could continue, Rex shifted again, closer now, his nose brushing lightly against Ethan's hand for the briefest second, a contact so small it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But in that moment it held everything, memory, promise, something unspoken that had never needed words. And then he stepped back as they lifted him carefully, the movement smooth, practiced, and as they turned toward the door, the house felt different, not empty, not yet, but changed, as if something had already begun to move on. The neighbor followed them out, pulling his jacket tighter against the cool night air, speaking briefly with one of the paramedics, his voice lower now, steadier, answering questions, providing what little information he had, while Rex stood at the threshold, watching, the light from inside falling behind him and the flashing lights ahead reflecting in his eyes. And for a moment he did not move, as if deciding, as if weighing something only he could feel. And then, without hesitation, he stepped forward, following, because staying behind was never part of the choice. Not then, not now. The ambulance doors opened, then closed, the sound final but not heavy, more like a transition than an ending. And as the vehicle pulled away slowly, its lights fading into the distance, Rex remained there, standing in the quiet that followed, the rain now barely more than a whisper, the world returning to stillness, but not the same stillness as before. This one carried something else, something lighter, something that had not been there earlier. And in that quiet, as the last echo of the sirens disappeared into the night, one truth settled gently, undeniable in its simplicity, that whatever had almost been lost had not been taken. Not this time, because something had seen it coming, something had refused to wait, and somewhere between instinct and something deeper, a second chance had been held onto long enough for the world to catch up. The ambulance did not race through the night. It moved with a steady urgency that felt almost restrained, as if even speed had learned to respect the fragile balance inside, and Rex ran behind it for as long as he could, his paws striking the wet pavement in a rhythm that echoed something older than instinct, something tied to memory, to duty, to a promise that had never been spoken but had always been understood, until the red lights blurred into the distance and the road stretched empty ahead of him, and only then did he stop, chest rising, breath steady but heavy with something deeper than exhaustion. And for a moment he stood there in the quiet aftermath, rain soft against his coat, the world holding its distance again, but not the same way it had before, because now the silence carried a question instead of an answer. The neighbor called out to him from the porch, his voice gentler now, less uncertain, offering something warm, something human, but Rex did not turn immediately, his gaze still fixed on the road where the ambulance had disappeared, as if the connection had not fully broken, as if some part of him was still moving with it, still inside that vehicle, still beside Ethan. And when he finally did move, it was not toward the house, not toward shelter, but toward the truck parked near the gravel path, the door still slightly open from where it had been left in haste, and he circled once, then twice, before settling near it, his body lowering slowly to the ground, not resting, not fully, but waiting, the kind of waiting that does not close its eyes. Time passed in quiet increments, the rain easing into a mist, the night deepening into that hour where everything feels suspended, and the neighbor watched from a distance, unsure at first, then understanding, because there was something in the way the dog held himself, something that did not ask for comfort, did not seek reassurance, only remained present, anchored to something beyond the moment. And eventually the man stepped back inside, leaving the porch light on, leaving the door unlocked, a small gesture offered into the stillness. Inside the hospital miles away, the lights were brighter, colder, the air carrying the scent of antiseptic and quiet urgency, and Ethan lay beneath them, surrounded now by movement that was controlled, precise, guided by knowledge and experience. And yet even there, even in that place built to hold life steady, there was a moment, brief but real, where everything seemed to pause, a thin line between what could be held and what might slip away, and in that space something shifted, subtle, almost invisible, like a breath taken deeper than before, like a rhythm finding its way back after nearly being lost, and the monitors reflected it not with drama, not with sudden change, but with consistency, a quiet return that carried more weight than anything loud ever could. Back on the quiet road, Rex lifted his head slightly, ears twitching at nothing the human world could hear, his gaze moving from the empty stretch of pavement to the horizon beyond it, as if something unseen had reached him, not a sound, not a signal, but a feeling, a shift so small it would have gone unnoticed by anyone else, and yet to him, it meant everything, because he had learned long ago that survival does not always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it returns slowly, one moment at a time, and he held on to that, not with certainty, not with relief, but with something steadier, something that did not need proof to exist. The wind moved gently through the trees now, carrying away the last traces of rain, the clouds breaking just enough for a faint line of stars to appear overhead, and the world seemed to settle into a quieter kind of stillness, not the heavy silence from before, but something lighter, something that felt like it could breathe again. And Rex lowered his head once more, not in surrender, not in rest, but in patience, because whatever came next would not happen here, not on this road, not in this moment, but he would be ready for it, just as he had been before, just as he would be again. Because some bonds are not measured in distance or time, they are carried, quietly, through every place you go, waiting for the moment they are needed, and when that moment comes, they do not hesitate. Morning did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, like something careful not to disturb what the night had almost taken, a pale gray light stretching across the horizon outside the small Montana town, touching the tops of trees first, then slipping quietly across the empty road where Rex still lay, his body curled but never fully at rest, his eyes opening before the sun had fully risen, as if he had never truly slept at all. And the world around him felt different now, not louder, not brighter, just shifted, like a breath held too long had finally been released somewhere far away, and he lifted his head, ears alert, listening again, not for danger, but for something else, something that could not be heard, only felt, a faint pull that reached beyond distance, beyond walls, beyond anything visible. And for a moment he remained still, reading it the way only he could. Inside the hospital, Ethan lay beneath steady light, the kind that erased shadows and replaced them with clarity, machines humming softly around him, each sound controlled, each rhythm monitored, and though his body was still, there was a change, subtle but undeniable, the kind that does not announce itself loudly but settles in quietly, like warmth returning to a place that had gone cold. And one of the nurses paused beside him, her eyes narrowing slightly as she watched the screen, not alarmed, not surprised, but attentive, because something was stabilizing, something finding its way back into alignment, and she adjusted the blanket gently. A small human gesture offered into a moment that had no need for words. Miles away, Rex stood slowly, his body stretching with quiet purpose, shaking off the last trace of dampness from the night before, his coat catching the early light as it broke through the thinning clouds, and he turned toward the road once more. But this time there was no urgency in his movement, no frantic energy pushing him forward, only direction, steady and certain, as if something inside him had shifted from warning to knowing. And without hesitation he began to walk, not running. Now, not chasing, just moving forward with a calm that carried its own weight. The neighbor stepped out onto the porch again, a cup of coffee in his hand, pausing when he saw Rex already on the move. And there was a moment where he considered calling out, offering help, offering a ride. But something in the way the dog walked stopped him, not because it was distant, but because it was purposeful, like interrupting it would mean breaking something important. And so he simply watched, taking a slow breath as the cool morning air settled around him, understanding now that whatever had happened the night before was not something that ended with sirens and flashing lights. It was something still, unfolding, quietly, somewhere beyond his reach. The road stretched ahead, damp from the rain but clear, leading toward the town, toward the hospital that stood just beyond it, and Rex followed it without hesitation, his pace steady, his gaze fixed ahead, and as he moved, the world seemed to open slightly around him, the sky brightening, the scent of wet earth fading into something cleaner, something new. And for the first time since the night began, there was no tension in his body, no question in his movement, only presence, only the quiet certainty that whatever waited ahead was not something he needed to search for anymore. It was something already beginning to return. Inside the hospital room, Ethan's fingers moved, just slightly, a small shift against the sheet that might have gone unnoticed if not for the nurse still standing nearby, her attention drawn to it instantly, and she leaned in closer, her voice soft as she spoke his name, grounding him, guiding him, and there was a response this time, not just a flicker, but a breath that carried intention, a sign that the distance between where he had been and where he was now was closing, slowly but surely. And in that quiet space filled with light and steady sound, something settled into place, not fully restored, not yet complete, but no longer slipping away. Outside, Rex reached the edge of town as the morning fully arrived, the sun breaking through in thin lines that stretched across buildings and streets, and he slowed for a moment, lifting his head once more, his ears catching a sound carried faintly on the air, distant but familiar, not a command, not a call, just a presence. Something that told him without words that he was close now, that the path he had followed through instinct and memory had led him exactly where he needed to be. And as he stepped forward again, crossing into the quiet movement of a waking town, there was no hesitation left in him, only the steady rhythm of something that had already done what it came to do, and was now simply finishing the journey. The hospital doors did not open with drama. They slid apart with a quiet mechanical grace that felt almost out of place against everything that had led to this moment, and Rex stepped through them without hesitation, his paws tapping softly against the polished floor, the scent of antiseptic and clean air immediately surrounding him, sharp and unfamiliar, yet not enough to stop him, because he had followed something deeper than scent to get here, something that now pulled him forward through long corridors washed in morning light, past strangers who paused just long enough to notice him, their eyes softening, curious, but not alarmed, as if they could sense that this was not a dog who had wandered in by accident. He moved steadily, not rushing, not searching blindly, but navigating with a quiet certainty that seemed to guide each turn, each step, until he reached a hallway where the air felt different, heavier but calmer, and there he slowed, his head lifting slightly, ears forward, listening, and for a moment everything seemed to align. The distant hum of machines, the soft murmur of voices, the rhythm of footsteps fading behind him, all narrowing into a single point ahead. Inside the room, Ethan's eyes opened slowly, not fully, not clearly, but enough to catch the light that filtered through the blinds, enough to feel the weight of the world returning in pieces, and his breath came steadier now, each inhale deeper than the last, as if his body was remembering something it had nearly forgotten, and though his vision blurred, there was a presence he felt before he saw it, something familiar, something anchored in memory and instinct. And when the door shifted slightly, just enough to let a quiet movement enter the room, Ethan's gaze followed, unfocused but searching, until it found the shape standing just inside. Rex did not rush forward. He stopped there, just past the threshold, his body still, his eyes fixed, as if the distance between them mattered, as if crossing it too quickly might break something fragile that had only just begun to return, and for a long second neither of them moved, the room holding its breath again, but not in fear this time, in recognition. And then Ethan's fingers twitched, more than before, his hand shifting slightly against the sheet, and though his voice did not come, though no words formed, there was something in that small movement that carried more weight than anything spoken, and Rex stepped forward, slow, deliberate, closing the space between them one quiet step at a time. The nurse who had been charting near the window paused when she saw him, her pen stilling mid-motion, surprise flickering across her face, but she did not call out, did not interrupt, because something about the moment felt complete without interference, as if stepping in would mean breaking a thread that had taken everything to hold together. And so she simply watched, her expression softening as Rex reached the side of the bed, his head lowering gently until his nose brushed against Ethan's hand again. The same contact as before, but different now, not urgent, not searching, just present. Ethan's fingers curled slightly this time, just enough to respond, just enough to meet that contact in return, and his eyes, though still heavy, focused for a brief second, landing on the shape in front of him, and something in his expression shifted, a tension easing, a recognition settling in, and though no words were spoken, the meaning was clear in the stillness between them, in the way his breath steadied even more, in the way his body no longer seemed to drift. Outside the window, the morning had fully arrived, sunlight stretching across the glass, warming the room with a quiet glow that replaced the cold tones of the night before, and inside, the monitors continued their steady rhythm, unchanged now, consistent, holding, and the nurse took a slow step back, giving them space, because some recoveries do not happen through intervention alone. Some are anchored by something that cannot be measured, something that arrives not through medicine, but through presence, through memory, through a bond that refuses to loosen even when everything else begins to slip. Rex remained there, unmoving, his head still near Ethan's hand, his eyes calm now, no longer searching, no longer warning, only watching, as if confirming something had finally settled into place. And in that quiet room filled with soft light and steady breath, one truth became undeniable, not spoken, not explained, just felt, that whatever had almost been lost had found its way back, not by chance, not by time alone, but because something had stayed, something had followed, something had refused to let go until the story could continue. Time did not rush forward after that moment. It unfolded slowly, like something careful not to disturb what had just been restored, and the room settled into a quiet rhythm where every sound felt intentional. The steady hum of machines, the soft movement of fabric as Ethan shifted slightly beneath the blanket, the faint scrape of a chair as the nurse moved closer again, her presence gentle, observant, and Rex remained exactly where he was, not as a guard now, not as a warning, but as something steadier, something that no longer needed to act because what had needed saving was no longer slipping away. Ethan's breathing deepened gradually, each inhale fuller than the last, as if his body was relearning its own weight, and his eyes, though still heavy, stayed open longer this time, tracking the light that stretched across the room, then settling again on Rex. And there was something different in his gaze now, not confusion, not strain, but recognition that reached beyond the surface. Something that connected past and present in a single quiet understanding. And his hand moved again, slower but stronger, his fingers brushing lightly through the fur at Rex's muzzle. A small motion, almost fragile, but deliberate, and Rex did not move away. He leaned into it just enough, accepting the contact with a calm that carried no urgency, only presence. The nurse stepped closer then, her voice soft as she spoke to Ethan, explaining where he was, what had happened, her tone steady and grounding, and Ethan listened, not fully processing every word, but enough to follow the shape of it, enough to understand that he had crossed something and come back. And when she mentioned the dog, when her eyes flicked briefly toward Rex, there was a pause in her voice, a moment where even she seemed to recognize that what had brought him here could not be explained in simple terms, and she let the silence hold that truth without trying to define it. Outside, the day moved forward, the hospital beginning to fill with quiet activity, footsteps in the hallway, distant voices, the world continuing its routine without knowing how close something had come to stopping. And inside the room, time felt different, slower, more deliberate, each second holding weight, not because it was fragile anymore, but because it had been, and that memory lingered in everything. A doctor entered briefly, his presence calm and measured, reviewing the monitors, speaking in low tones about stabilization, about response, about a recovery that would take time but had begun in the right direction. And though his words carried certainty, there was something unspoken beneath them, something that did not fit into charts or explanations. And he glanced once at Rex, not questioning, not surprised, just acknowledging, as if even he understood that not everything that mattered could be measured. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, not slipping away this time, just resting, and his hand remained where it was, lightly touching Rex, maintaining that connection even in stillness. And Rex stayed, his body relaxed now, his breathing steady, his gaze soft but attentive, as if the role he had carried through the night had shifted into something quieter, something that did not require movement, only presence. The sunlight grew warmer as it moved across the floor, reaching the edge of the bed, touching the space between them, and in that light, everything seemed clearer, not just the room, not just the moment, but the path that had led here, the quiet decisions, the unseen signals, the instinct that had refused to be ignored. And though no one spoke of it directly, though no words were offered to define it, the meaning settled gently into the space, carried in the way Ethan's breathing steadied, in the way Rex remained without hesitation, in the way the room itself felt different now, no longer holding its breath, but exhaling slowly, as if acknowledging that something had been returned, something that might have been lost had found its way back again, and this time, it stayed. The days that followed did not announce themselves with sudden change. They unfolded quietly, one steady moment after another, like something being rebuilt without drawing attention to the work it took to hold it together. And Ethan remained in that room as the light shifted from morning to afternoon and back again, his strength returning not in leaps, but in small, deliberate steps, a deeper breath, a clearer focus, a hand that no longer trembled when it moved. And through all of it, Rex stayed close. Not always at the edge of the bed, not always watching with the same intensity as before, but always there, a presence that had become as natural as the air itself, no longer urgent, no longer guarding, just existing beside him in a way that needed no explanation. The doctors came and went, their voices calm, their words measured, speaking of recovery, of rest, of adjustments that would be needed, and Ethan listened, more present each time, his mind clearing in pieces, memory returning like fragments of a story that had almost been interrupted. And when he looked at Rex now, truly looked, there was something in his expression that carried both gratitude and understanding, not just for what had happened, but for what it meant, for the fact that this was not the first time he had been pulled back from something he could not fight alone. One afternoon, when the sunlight fell softly across the floor and the room was filled with a quiet that felt earned rather than fragile, Ethan shifted himself upright with slow determination, the effort visible but controlled, and the nurse nearby offered a steadying hand, her smile small but genuine as she watched him sit there, present, aware, and when he turned slightly, his hand reaching down toward Rex once more. The movement was stronger now, more certain, and Rex responded in kind, lifting his head, stepping closer, meeting that hand with the same calm acceptance he had shown before, the same quiet understanding that had carried them both through moments no one else had seen. There were no words exchanged then, none that needed to be spoken, because whatever existed between them had never relied on language. It had been built in places where words did not reach, carried through decisions made without hesitation, through nights where silence had been heavier than sound, and now it rested there, simple, steady, unbroken. Outside, the town moved on as it always did, cars passing along the road, people stepping through their routines, the world continuing without pause, unaware of how close something had come to ending within a single quiet home just days before. And yet inside that hospital room, something had shifted in a way that would not fade with time, something that would remain long. After the machines were gone, long after the routines resumed, when the day finally came for Ethan to leave, it did not feel like a conclusion. It felt like a continuation, the same quiet kind that had followed every moment since that night. And as he stepped outside, the air cool but clear, the sky stretching wide above him, there was a pause, brief but real, as if he was measuring something unseen, and Rex stood beside him, steady, patient, not pulling forward, not looking back, simply waiting, as he always had. Ethan reached down then, his hand resting on Rex's head, holding there for a second longer than before, not out of need, not out of fear, but out of recognition, and when he finally stepped forward, moving into the world again, Rex moved with him, not leading, not following, just beside, the distance between them unchanged, and as they walked, there was no sound of urgency, no trace of what had almost been lost, only the quiet rhythm of two lives continuing, held together by something that had already proven itself twice, and did not need to prove anything more. Some stories do not end in victory. They settle into something quieter, something steadier, where the miracle is not in what was saved, but in what chose to stay. In a quiet Montana town where the wind carries the scent of rain and memory, a U.S. Marine returns home believing the war is behind him. But the real battle begins in silence as his loyal German shepherd senses danger no one else can see, creating one of the most powerful animal stories about instinct, loyalty, and unseen miracles. When the former Marine collapses inside his own home, it is not chaos or noise that saves him, but the unwavering presence of his K9 companion who refuses to accept the stillness, setting into motion a chain of events that proves why the bond between a Marine and his dog stands at the heart of unforgettable animal stories. Through darkness, distance, and doubt, the German shepherd runs through the night to find help, guided not by commands but by something deeper, a connection forged long before this moment, making this one of those animal stories that remind us how loyalty can transcend logic. As emergency lights fade and hope hangs by a thread, the story shifts to a hospital room where recovery begins quietly, not through dramatic turns, but through small breaths, steady rhythms, and the silent presence of a dog who has already saved his Marine once before, reinforcing why stories like this define the emotional core of animal stories. In the stillness of healing, where words are unnecessary and every movement carries meaning, the bond between the Marine and his German shepherd becomes something more than companionship. It becomes proof that some souls stay not because they are trained to, but because they choose to, a truth that elevates this into one of the most moving animal stories you will ever witness. As strength returns and the world resumes its pace outside, what remains is not just survival but grace, a quiet understanding that miracles do not always arrive with noise. Sometimes they walk beside you on four paws, ensuring that even when everything else fades, loyalty endures. And this is why stories like these continue to define the heart of animal stories.